For some, staying at home during a pandemic carries its own dangers. That's because for victims of intimate partner and sexual violence, the threat is in their own home.
Survivors are feeling a heightened sense of fear, being cut off from their normal support networks and safety nets, and some are reporting an increase in the frequency and severity of the abuse that they're experiencing while in a situation.
And yet the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization, RAINN, is finding that some survivors are choosing to live with danger rather than go out.
So when folks are reaching out to us for support, many of them are highlighting concerns around their own health as considerations about whether or not they feel safe enough to access support out in the world, or whether they feel like they need to stay at home, even though the risk to them could be life-threatening.
It's more complicated than ever for survivors to see their doctor, their lawyer, or even get to a police station. And an immediate ride, especially in the aftermath of a sexual assault, can be vital.
To be able to freely ride, particularly in this moment, to a doctor's office to collect evidence, to prosecute a case, which tends to happen within a particular time frame after a sexual violent event, is critically important. Without that evidence, that person could have a harder time making the case to law enforcement and certainly having a successful case in court.
Now, when someone calls the RAINN hotline for help, the local person they talk to may be able to offer a free Lyft ride wherever they need to go.
We've committed to funding over 1,000 rides as a start. This is a pilot program. So at this time, if someone feels like they're in danger, if they have been a survivor at this point of sexual assault or any domestic violence, then that's why we worked with RAINN to provide service providers in cities across the country.
RAINN says they anticipate reports of intimate partner and sexual violence will increase as shelter-in-place orders lift and victims are able to head back out into the world. But help is available now.
I want survivors to know that RAINN is here to listen and support them during this difficult time and at all times. And if you or someone you know has been affected by sexual violence, please contact RAINN's National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE or online.rainn.org.
A German town pulling its emergency brake and delaying its reopening after a spike in COVID-19 cases. NBC global correspondent Carl Nassman shows us what's happening in Greece.
Hey, Allison, of course, Germany is considered a coronavirus success story, but that success is now being tested as we're seeing several hotspots popping up around the nation. I'm actually standing in really the epicenter of these new outbreaks. This is Greiz. This is in central Germany. Here, the new daily infection rate spiking as high as 10% of the national average over the last couple of weeks. In fact, you know, the number's so high that the German military actually had to be called in to help with the medical response. They've been conducting thousands of tests in the hospitals and in the nursing rooms here. Now, this is really considered the first major test of what's called the emergency brake system here in Germany. If a region like Greiz were to exceed the levels of daily new infections that are considered safe, then lockdowns would be reimposed. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So some restaurants that were supposed to actually open last week, they've delayed those openings for 2 more weeks. Visitations at hospitals and care centers have been canceled to protect the residents inside there. Now, what about people living here in what's being called Germany's new coronavirus hotspot? Well, what's life like for them? I spoke with the head of Germany's military response here. Here's what he told me.
My feeling is that the people understand quite well that if you have a hotspot of this epidemic situation, then you have, of course, other rules than perhaps 50, 60, or 100 kilometers away where there are no new cases.
And with that being said, you know, businesses are not happy about these new restrictions, these new lockdown measures really hurting their pocketbooks. But this is something that all countries are going to have to deal with, the United States included. How do you continue to reopen a country while still locking down on those small parts that are seeing infections spiking once again? And how do you get residents to buy into that as well? Allison?
Belarus is one of the few countries in the world without stay-at-home orders. Belarus has reported more than 30,000 confirmed coronavirus cases and 171 deaths, but critics believe the government there is covering up a much higher death rate. NBC News global correspondent Helena Humphrey has the story.
Hi there, Alison. Well, as anti-lockdown protests continue in the United States and other countries around the world, some people are asking what would have happened if lockdown was never implemented at all. And in fact, Belarus in Eastern Europe is one of the few countries that didn't bring in any containment measures. The president of that country, Alexander Lukashenko, calling the global response to the coronavirus pandemic, in his own words, psychosis. In fact, he's been urging citizens in that country to drink vodka and go to the sauna in a bid to stay healthy and ward off the virus. Now, sports leagues have continued in that country, as have mass public gatherings. Earlier this month, we saw in the capital, Minsk, a military parade to celebrate the anniversary of the Soviet victory in the Second World War, with thousands of people turning out for that. Now, some people might be wondering why no measures were brought in, and people I've been speaking to in Belarus say they think that the president wants to shore up the economy and also shore up his image as a strongman leader. Nevertheless, concerns are growing. The country is now seeing over 31,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus. The death toll is comparatively low at around 175 deaths, but questions are being raised as to whether that is accurate data or whether the secretive state is covering up the consequences of its actions or inaction, in fact. And earlier, I spoke to Andrei Sanakov. He's an influential leader of the opposition and a lawmaker from Belarus, now in exile in Poland. Here's what he told me about the situation.
We were really heading for catastrophe of not of Belarusian scale, but of international scale with coronavirus in Belarus. And we will very soon require international efforts to help us. Many people compare the situation in Belarus with coronavirus with Chernobyl, when the authorities, the then Soviet authorities, tried to hide the truth, tried to conceal it.
You heard there Andrei Sanakov comparing the situation to Chernobyl and the cover-up in the Soviet Union in the 1980s from that nuclear disaster. And in fact, some people who I've been speaking to in Belarus are taking matters into their own hands, going about social distancing, despite the fact that that goes against government wishes.
In times of crisis, poster art has spread awareness and important government messages. Think of Rosie the Riveter or the iconic Uncle Sam I Want You posters. And the coronavirus is no different. Take a look at how artists are helping to spread health advisories and inspire us during this pandemic.
I think that artistic expression during a pandemic, during a war, or during difficult times in general is a way of marking history.
If I can just have a simple illustration instead of being bogged down in like data, flowcharts, and everything else, and it can tell a story or even just make people empathize with what's going on.
The question is whether art during a pandemic such as this can save lives. And I really believe that posters that appear on the street, in newspapers, that are ubiquitous, to really see projected on a building or in their hands, images of hand washing, images of social distance that are aspirational, that are supportive, then yes, it really can make a difference. I've been thinking a lot about what took place culturally in response to the AIDS crisis in the 80s. I was really inspired to see the response from the artistic community, which of course was hit very hard. And artists and designers banded together to create really visual campaigns to bring attention to the issues. And they were in many ways quite successful. That it was a time that the art world really galvanized and got involved on a level that is pretty unprecedented, at least in my lifetime.
The amplifier's job is to amplify the most important movements of our time. So we initially thought, how can we start sourcing and creating enough art that we can literally help flatten the curve and save lives with public health and safety messaging. But then also immediately, how could we make imagery that could lift people's spirits? Because we're also looking at serious issues of mental health and well-being at risk with people being in quarantine. Because I believe that art can create those signposts to a new future. And we see that with artists in the past and in all of the great movements that artists made those symbols that point to the future.
There is a certain stylistic nostalgia for what we call agitprop, which is essentially poster, public service announcements, if you will. And I think artists are turning to that vocabulary because it's familiar and it's effective. Just to say, I think that the question of symbol making right now is absolutely critical. Thinking about the peace sign or the raised fist, I think the mask absolutely does function that way. I'm thinking about the younger generation that really is inheriting this.
I believe in that power of the analog still, even in this digital time, because it just keeps being that reminder. It keeps being that compass on our refrigerator or on our wall or on our water bottle or in our window for our friends and our family and our neighbors to see. And I think when we see symbols like that over and over again, it reminds us what we're fighting for.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.